Hey guys, welcome back to Claire Minded. My name is Claire. I am super stoked to be back here with you. We've been diving more into the food programs, and in today's video, we're diving into the Vata Kapha diet. And this is going to be a dual doshic diet plan, foodless food program from an Ayurvedic perspective. So in today's video about the Vata Kapha diet, first I'm going to give you a brief background on both of those doshas. We're going to dive into the Ayurvedic 6 tastes and find the common taste that will be best for a Vata Kapha imbalance. And then we'll get into specific foods that are going to be best for a Vata Kapha dual doshic diet if you're dealing with an imbalance or if this is your normal constitution. So Vata Kapha imbalance or combination, this is actually one of my favorite to work with because it can seem so confusing because Vata and Kapha are complete opposites. Vata is air and ether, Kapha is earth and water. Vata's up here, Kapha's down here with the earth. So how can you bring these both into balance? They're so opposite, right? And when you're looking to bring balance to a specific imbalanced dosha, you normally want to bring in the opposing elements. However, with a Vata Kapha combination imbalance, if you were to bring in the opposing elements, you would aggravate one of the doshas involved. So if you try to raise Kapha, you're going to aggravate the Vata. And if you try to lower the high air Vata qualities, you're going to rise that Kapha. So it's a really fun, interesting combination of the doshas that we're going to dive into, but don't worry, we're going to take it slow. I'm going to explain it, and please let me know if you have any questions below because this one is super fun. Okay, so when we work with a doshic imbalance, it's important to know that we always go back to the 5 foundational elements. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, the 5 great elements are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So everything comes back to that. And we look to bring balance to ourselves through lifestyle practices, through diet, through mindfulness, by bringing in these opposing elements. So when we dive into a Vata Kapha dual doshic combination, Kapha is made up of earth and water. So it's very heavy, it's dense, it's stable. Vata, on the other hand, is made up of air and ether. So it's very cold, it's light, it's dry, it's flowing. So when you have a Vata Kapha dual doshic imbalance, that means your Vata and your Kapha are not aligned with your true state of constitution or your prakruti, what we call it in Ayurveda. Now, like I mentioned, normally when you have a single imbalance of one dosha, you look to bring in the opposing elements. However, with Vata and Kapha, they're direct opposites. So when we think back to the foundational elements, what element is missing out of Kapha and Vata? As Kapha is earth and water, Vata is air and ether, what is the one element that they're missing? It's fire. So they both need to be warmed up in a way. They both need that heat to heat them up, bring in some warmth. They both need fire. Now, more specifically, as we move into the Vata Kapha diet plan, we need to know the Ayurvedic 6 tastes. And the Ayurvedic 6 tastes are sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. And these tastes are all made up of the 5 great elements. I have a video all about the Ayurvedic 6 tastes that you can check out if you want more details on that. So now into the 6 tastes. So as we focus on heating up, the 2 tastes that are best for a Vata Kapha imbalance are going to contain the fire element. So the pungent and the sour tastes are 2 of the better tastes for a Vata Kapha imbalance because the pungent taste is fire and air, so it's really going to ignite you. It's the hottest of the tastes, so it's really going to bring that heat for both of these cold doshas. The second best taste for a Vata Kapha imbalance is going to be the sour taste. And the sour taste is made up of fire and earth, but it definitely carries a lot of that fire-like qualities, lemon, limes, tomatoes. It's got that acidity that's going to stoke your Agni and bring in that fire and bring in that warmth. Now, some other tastes that will be okay to have in moderation for a Vata Kapha imbalance would be the salty taste and the astringent taste. And the salty taste is made up of water and fire. However, the salty taste is very aggravating to the Kapha dosha because it has that water. Anytime you add salt, it's going to increase the water retention in your system and in your body, which will aggravate Kapha. So you can have salty things, but just in a smaller amount. And then the other taste would be astringent. And astringent is made up of earth and air. And it definitely carries a lot of those airy-like qualities. Think legumes, popcorn, green apples, pomegranates, something that you put in your mouth, you're like, It's just very astringent, right? So you can have it in more of a smaller amount. Now, the worst taste to consume if you have a Vata Kapha imbalance, like this dual doshic imbalance, would be the sweet taste and the bitter taste. And this is because the sweet taste is made up of earth and water, the exact elements of Kapha dosha. And then the bitter taste, on the other hand, is made up of air and ether, which are the exact elements of the Vata dosha. So the sweet and the bitter taste would be most aggravating if you have a Vata Kapha imbalance. We're talking about a dual doshic imbalance for a Vata Kapha person. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Now we're gonna jump into a specific food list and food program that you can incorporate into your life if you have a specific Vata Kapha imbalance for a dual doshic constitution. Now, one thing that is super important to note about this food list that I'm about to give you is that it is not comprehensive, meaning that this is not the only foods that you can eat ever if you have a Vata Kapha imbalance. However, it does give you a great starting point if you do have a Vata Kapha imbalance. So just know that going in, this list is not comprehensive, but it gives you a great starting point. So we're gonna start with grains. So if you have a Vata Kapha imbalance or a dual doshic constitution, the best grains for a Vata Kapha would be amaranth, barley, basmati rice, brown rice, buckwheat, quinoa, wild rice. And of course, you really want to soak your grains to help with the digestibility of these grains, as well as cooking them well and consuming them warm. A couple other grains that you can have in smaller amounts would be millet or rye, but you would want to avoid corn flour, oats, sticky rice, white rice, or wheat. So next is dairy, but it's important to note that dairy typically is very aggravating for the Kapha dosha. However, when you have a Vata Kapha imbalance, it's important to treat the Vata without aggravating the Kapha. So you can just have these dairy products in smaller amounts to nourish that Vata dosha that's imbalanced, but not consuming too much where it's going to aggravate your imbalanced Kapha. So when consuming dairy, you always want to choose raw or organic products. Milk should always be taken warm, and I encourage you to add spices such as ginger or cardamom to it to help in the digestion. Ghee and yogurt should also be consumed warm and with warming spices as well, such as cinnamon. So the best dairy products for a Vata Kapha imbalance or dual doshic constitution would be buttermilk, ghee, 2% milk, and low-fat yogurt. In smaller amounts, you can have sour cream, whole milk yogurt, or kefir. But for a Vata Kapha, you definitely want to avoid butter, cheeses, soft cheeses, hard cheeses, cottage cheese, ice cream, frozen yogurt, or any cold dairy products. Next is sweeteners. And again, sweeteners are something you don't want to overdo for a Vata Kapha imbalance because too much sweetness can aggravate that Kapha dosha. So you want to consume in smaller amounts to not aggravate Kapha. So the best sweetener for a Vata Kapha imbalance would be honey. Smaller amounts, you can have molasses or jaggery, but very small amounts of those because too much will aggravate your Kapha imbalance. You definitely want to avoid date sugar, fructose, grape sugar, maltose, maple sugar, maple syrup, rice syrup, or even white table sugar. Next, we're on to oils. And oils are super fun for a Vata Kapha dual doshic imbalance because oils typically aggravate Kapha because they're very heavy, they're dense, they're very moist. However, because of that Vata at play in this dual doshic imbalance, you may be dry and you may be cold. So you want to lubricate your skin and really ample up your system by using oil. And you can focus on using lighter oils so it won't aggravate your Kapha imbalance. So the best oils for a Vata Kapha imbalance dual doshic constitution would be flaxseed, ghee, mustard, and safflower oil. In smaller amounts, like very, very small amounts, you can have almond oil, corn oil, castor, olive oil, sesame, or soy. You definitely want to avoid avocado, coconut, or lard. Next, we're on to fruits. And while most fruits are very sweet, ripe, and they have a lot of water content, this can aggravate the Kapha of the dual doshic imbalance that you have going on. So it's important to know that when you choose fruits, you want to be choosing fruits that are going to balance both Vata and Kapha. So you want to focus on more sour fruits or more unripe fruits because these will have less water content. So fruit in general shouldn't be a staple in a Vata Kapha diet plan. However, you can have it on occasional use. So the best fruits for a Vata Kapha diet plan would be apricots, grapefruit, lemon, papaya. In smaller amounts, you can have baked apples, sour banana, blueberries, blackberries, cranberries, cherries, sour oranges, pineapple, plums, pomegranates, or raspberries. The fruits you want to avoid on a Vata Kapha diet plan would be avocado, a sweet banana, coconut, date, figs, melons, peaches, pears, persimmons. Next, we're on to vegetables. And now it's important to know on a Vata Kapha diet plan, you want to be focusing on cooked vegetables. And this is because we want to increase that fire element. We want to increase that heat. So we want to cook our vegetables because when we consume raw vegetables, they carry a lot of air and ether and cold qualities. So that's going to aggravate both doshas because both doshas are very cold. And if you eat anything that's cold, that's only going to increase the like. So we want to bring in more of that fire element by cooking our vegetables and eating them warm. So the best vegetables for a Vata Kapha diet would be artichokes, beets, carrots, cauliflower, chili peppers, green beans, leeks, mung bean sprouts, mustard greens, onion, parsley, potato, radish, tomato, sunflower sprouts. Smaller amount vegetables that you can consume warm would be things like alfalfa sprouts, bell peppers, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, celery, cilantro, kale, lettuce, mushrooms, okra, peas, spinach, seaweed, squash, Swiss chard. You want to avoid asparagus, bitter melon, cabbage, cucumber, squash, sweet potato, and yams. Nuts and seeds. So nuts and seeds, these should be taken lightly dry roasted, and you can add some digestive spices like cumin, coriander, or garlic powder. The best nuts and seeds to consume would be pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, or pine nuts. You want to avoid almonds, Brazil nuts, cashews, coconut, macadamians, peanuts, pecans, pistachios, and walnuts because those are going to be too heavy. Next, we're moving into meats. And on a Vata Kapha diet plan, it's important to know that any meat will aggravate your Kapha dosha. And from an Ayurvedic and yoga perspective, we always emphasize more of a vegetarian diet for more spiritual reasons. However, if you have a very weak patient or you feel extremely weak, something more gentle if you do consume meat would be consuming a bone broth, and that will nourish your Vata dosha, but it won't aggravate your Kapha dosha as much. And while there's not any meats that are very good for a Vata Kapha dual doshic diet, a couple things you can have in smaller amounts if you do consume meat would be chicken or turkey or fresh fish. You would want to avoid beef, duck, pork, lamb, or shellfish. Next is legumes, and legumes are always best taken when they're soaked overnight, they're cooked well, and they have warming spices added to them. Because if not, they can be very hard for the system to digest, especially for the Vata imbalance that you're dealing with. So the best legumes would be mung beans, tempeh, and tofu. You would want to avoid black beans, chickpeas, fava beans, kidney beans, lentils, lima beans, navy beans, peas, pinto beans, or soybeans. Next, we're diving into spices, and spices are amazing, they're delicious, and this is the exact place where you can really bring in that warming element to aid digestion, heat up the body, and bring balance to both Vata and Kapha. So spices not only aid in the digestion, but they aid in the absorption of the nutrients and the foods that you're consuming. So warm and hot spices are recommended for a Vata Kapha imbalance. And this is because the overall effect of the warming spices is that it brings in that fire element, which is missing from both Vata and Kapha. However, if the food becomes too hot, that could increase the dryness in your system, so it is something to be aware of. So the best spices are pretty much all of them. Allspice, anise, basil, bay leaf, black pepper, caraway, catnip, cayenne, celery seed, chamomile, clove, coriander, cumin, curry powder, dill, fennel, fenugreek, garlic, fresh ginger, horseradish, lemon, mustard seed, nutmeg, oregano, paprika, parsley, peppermint, poppy seed, rosemary, saffron, delicious, sage, spearmint, thyme, turmeric. A spice that you can have in a smaller amount would be things like salt. There aren't too many spices that you would want to avoid on a Vata Kapha imbalance. Just be aware of consuming too hot of spices, as that could increase the dryness. Next is condiments, and the best condiment for Vata Kapha would be vinegar. Some things you can have in a smaller amount: ketchup, carob, or chocolate. You would definitely want to avoid mayonnaise. Lastly is beverages, and beverages are best taken at room temperature or warm. Never ice cold, because remember, Vata and Kapha are both cold doshas, so we want to increase that heat. So if we consume anything cold, that will aggravate both Vata and Kapha. So the most balancing drinks and beverages for a Vata Kapha imbalance would be chamomile tea, licorice tea, mint tea, spicy teas, ginger tea, and of course water. Beverages you can have in a smaller amount would be sour fruit juices like lemon, lime, pineapple, pomegranate, cranberry, some vegetable juices, but you definitely want to make sure there's no added sugar. You would want to avoid alcohol, coffee, soft drinks, sweet fruit juices, pop, soda, anything with sugar added, you would want to avoid that. Okay, thank you for staying with me. So this was all about the Vata Kapha dual doshic diet plan and food list that I gave you. So this food list is for you if you are dealing with a dual doshic imbalance of Vata and Kapha. In this video, I briefly went over what Vata and Kapha is, and they're made up of air and ether and earth and water. So as we move into the foundational elements, fire is the only element missing from both of these doshas. So that's what this diet plan and this food list focus on, is bringing in that fire element and more of those warming foods and spices. We briefly talked about the Ayurvedic 6 tastes and which ones were best for a Vata Kapha imbalance, and then we dove straight into the specific food list. I'm so grateful for you guys being here. If you have any further questions about anything I mentioned in this video, please drop them in the show notes below. It's important to know this was not a comprehensive list by any means, but this is a great starting point for you to dive in. So thank you guys for being here. If you haven't subscribed to my page already, please do that. I am here for you guys. And if you have any videos that you want to see, let me know them in the show notes below, or send me a message. Check me out on Instagram, Claire Minded. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you again.